All right, get ready to go way back in time with us today, because we're taking a deep dive into the story of the Yellow Emperor, a legend in Chinese history.
Oh, what a legend it is. He's like the ultimate ancestor figure.
So more than just a name, we're talking about a real historical heavyweight here.
Absolutely, yeah. Imagine someone as important to a culture as, say, George Washington, but from a time so far back, it's almost mythical.
Now, that's what I call intriguing. So what are we talking exactly, and what makes this Yellow Emperor so important?
We're talking roughly 2600 BCE, so over 4,500 years ago. And get this, he's considered the ancestor of the Han Chinese, the largest ethnic group in China today.
Wow, that is a legacy.
Right. And it's not just some distant history either. Even now, many Chinese people refer to themselves as Yan and Huang descendants, linking themselves to this ancient lineage.
Yan and Huang. Is that like a dynamic duo from the past?
You got it. The Yan Emperor was an earlier figure, also seen as a progenitor. Interestingly, both he and the Yellow Emperor came from different tribes, but they shared a common ancestor further back.
It's like a family reunion across millennia.
Mm-hmm.
But if they were from different tribes, I'm guessing the Yellow Emperor's story is a bit more complicated than a peaceful inheritance, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We're talking major power struggles, shifting alliances, the works. He didn't just inherit power, he emerged from some seriously chaotic times.
That's what I like to hear. And speaking of emerging, one of the texts mentioned an incredible birth story. Lightning strikes, a super long pregnancy. It sounds almost made up.
That's a classic case of what we call euhemerism, giving historical figures these grand, divine origins. It's not just a Chinese thing either. You see it all over.
So were ancient people just easily impressed by a good lightning show?
It's more than just being impressed. Imagine a time when nature was both awesome and terrifying. Saying a leader's birth involved a lightning strike wasn't just a cool story. It was about establishing their authority as almost like divinely ordained.
I get it. Like the heavens themselves chose this guy. Smart move to ensure everyone takes you seriously.
Right. And then there's that detail about the long pregnancy, longer even than an elephant, which already has the longest gestation out there.
Okay, that's a long time. I'm guessing there's a reason they included that specific detail.
Absolutely. Think about it in nature. A longer pregnancy often means a stronger offspring. Even metaphorically, it ties into this idea that the Yellow Emperor was destined for greatness.
So he enters the world with this aura of destiny already. What happens next? Does he just waltz into power?
Not quite. Remember those tribal dynamics we talked about? Well, the Yan Emperor's tribe was facing problems from a group called the Jiuli, known for, well, their love of a good battle.
Ah, the classic might makes right era of history, right? This is where things get interesting.
You got it. The Jiulis were a force to be reckoned with. Imagine. Metal helmets, metal weapons, they were practically unstoppable.
Hold on, they had metalworking back then. That's amazing. Not exactly what you picture when you think of ancient tribes.
Exactly. And that's the thing. The Jiuli, they were described as having iron foreheads and copper heads, which, probably refers to their armor and weapons. They were advanced and represented a real challenge.
So how did the Yan Emperor handle that challenge?
Sadly, not well. Despite their own advancements, they couldn't match the Jiuli's weaponry and suffered a major defeat.
Ouch. Not good for your reputation as a leader. What do we do?
Well, instead of confronting the Jiuli directly, he took out his frustration on a weaker target, the Yellow Emperor and his tribe.
Wow, talk about kicking someone when they're down. How did the Yellow Emperor respond to that?
And this is where we really see his strategic mind at work. Instead of engaging in a pointless, probably devastating conflict, he chose to avoid a direct confrontation.
That seems a little passive for someone destined for greatness, doesn't it?
Not necessarily. He chose to preserve his tribe's strength. Remember, this was a nomadic period, so instead of a costly war, he moved his people to a different territory.
So instead of fighting a losing battle, he just packs up and leaves. I get it, but it's not exactly heroic, is it?
Yep. But that's the thing about this strategic retreat. It leads to a pivotal moment, maybe even the pivotal moment in the Yellow Emperor's story. This is where we get the legend of the wheel.
Wait, are we talking about the wheel? Like the invention that changed transportation forever, that wheel.
The one and only. And now, what wasn't like some big eureka moment. The story goes that the Yellow Emperor was watching his hat rolling in the wind, and that got him thinking.
I have to ask, what kind of hat are we talking about here? I'm picturing something large and elaborate, not exactly aerodynamic.
Well, the texts describe it as a wide-brimmed hat. The point is, he saw this circular shape could move easily, and he started experimenting.
Okay, so we've got a hat-inspired brainstorm. What happens next?
He calls upon his advisors, and remember, these aren't just any advisors. We're talking brilliant minds like Cangjie, who would later be credited with inventing writing.
An ancient think tank. So they see this proto-wheel. What do they do with it?
They take the Yellow Emperor's initial idea and run with it. They experiment with different materials, figure out axles, and before you know it, they've created a functional cart, the Swan Yuan, named after the Yellow Emperor himself.
From a gust of wind and a well-placed hat, we get the world's first cart. It's amazing how this story shows that innovation is often a team effort.
Absolutely. Collaboration is key throughout history. Behind every great leader, you'll often find a team of brilliant minds working together.
Speaking of game changers, this new invention must have been huge for the Yellow Emperor's tribe.
Oh, absolutely. Suddenly, they could transport goods and people much more efficiently. They even started harnessing horses to pull the carts, essentially inventing the war chariot.
Now, that's an upgrade. But what about that conflict with the Jiuli tribe? Did they ever cross paths again?
They did, and it wasn't pretty. After a series of victories, including that win over the Yuan Emperor, Chiyou and the Jiuli became a major threat.
So the Yuan Emperor is basically stuck between a rock and a hard place with these metal-wielding warriors on the rise.
Exactly. Realizing he couldn't handle this alone, the Yuan Emperor had to reach out to the very person he had wronged the Yellow Emperor.
Oh man, I bet that was satisfying for the Yellow Emperor, having his rival begging for help.
Perhaps, but this was also a turning point. The Yellow Emperor, seeing the bigger threat, agreed to an alliance. And together, they prepared for what became a legendary showdown. The Battle of Zuolu.
Okay, this has epic battle written all over it. Set the scene for us. Where did this clash of titans take place?
Picture this. A vast plain in northern China, in what's now Hebei province. Two of the most powerful leaders in ancient China, their armies assembled, ready to fight for dominance.
I can only imagine the tension. Was it the Yellow Emperor's fancy new chariots that won the day?
While the chariots definitely helped, it was more than just technology that won the Yellow Emperor the victory. He was known for his strategic thinking. He used things like drums and gongs to confuse and frighten the Jiuli warriors.
Psychological warfare. Brilliant, especially if your enemy has never encountered anything like it before.
Exactly. But there's more. Legend has it a thick fog rolled in, and the Yellow Emperor, using his knowledge of the stars, and maybe even an early compass-like device called the south-pointing chariot, navigated through the fog and gained a decisive advantage.
A chariot that points south. That sounds almost like something out of a fantasy novel.
It's one of those details that makes you wonder what's real and what's myth, right? But it speaks to the enduring fascination with the Yellow Emperor's ingenuity. After a fierce battle, Chiyou, the leader of the Jiuli, was defeated, and his forces were either vanquished or absorbed into the Yellow Emperor's growing ranks.
Ah, what a victory. This wasn't just a battle, it was a turning point for the entire region. The Yellow Emperor had proven himself as a leader, bringing these warring tribes together under his rule.
And with that, a new chapter begins, not just for the Yellow Emperor, but for the land and the people he now leads.
So the Yellow Emperor is victorious, he's brought these tribes together, and there's this whole destiny thing going on. What happens next? Does he build himself a palace and relax?
Well, palaces maybe came later, but he does establish a capital city, a center for this new realm. And it's not just about land, it's about creating a system of governance for people who, up until this point, had been separate tribes.
So a real shift from a nomadic life to a more organized society. He's setting the stage for a civilization here. What kind of changes did he put in place?
Quite a few, actually, and they're big ones. For one, he standardizes weights and measures. Think how important that is for trade. And then there are the laws and social reforms. He's credited with some of the earliest Chinese law and setting down social customs.
It's amazing how many basic things we take for granted, law, trade, are traced back to this one figure. Makes you wonder what he was like, you know?
Oh, definitely. And that's part of it, that Yellow Emperor isn't just seen as a warrior king, but as a culture hero. He's the ideal of bringing order to a world still kind of emerging from its mythical past.
You know, one thing I always found interesting was the mention of midday marketplaces. Like, he specifically set up trade to happen during the hottest part of the day. Why? It seems counterintuitive.
It does sound strange at first, but think about it. You're haggling over silk or tea in the blazing sun. Those negotiations are going to wrap up pretty quick, right?
Okay, I see. No one wants to argue when they're about to melt. It's like early time management, using the environment to your advantage.
Exactly. It suggests a practical mind, an understanding of how people work, which a good leader needs, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just practical stuff, right? Weren't there some big social changes happening around this time too?
You're right. One of the most significant things during and after the Yellow Emperor's time is the shift from more matriarchal societies to a patriarchal system.
A big change. It makes you think, how did the roles of men and women change as farming became central to their lives?
Precisely. As farming and livestock became more important, roles often associated with men plowing, protecting herds, probably gained more significance, leading to that shift towards patriarchy.
It reminds you that even these figures from so long ago, they weren't just myths. They were living in a changing world, making choices that shaped the future.
Absolutely. And speaking of shaping the future, we can't forget the people the Yellow Emperor surrounded himself with. Those advisors were key to all those innovations that would define China.
Right. We talked about Cangjie and writing, but there was also Leizu, credited with something equally huge, silk. Tell us about her.
The story goes that Leizu, the Yellow Emperor's wife, was watching silkworms spin their cocoons. And that's what led to sericulture cultivating silkworms and creating that luxurious fabric that's so connected to China.
It's amazing to think something as simple as watching a worm could lead to such a big invention. Silk wasn't just fabric, it was a status symbol, art. It shows the power of observation and how individuals can have a huge impact, even if history forgets them.
I agree. And it shows that for all his achievements, the Yellow Emperor understood the importance of collaboration, of recognizing the talents of those around him.
A lesson that's still relevant today. We've talked about the Yellow Emperor as a warrior, a strategist, an innovator, but what's his lasting significance? Why, after all this time, is he still such a big deal?
Because it's bigger than just battles or inventions. The Yellow Emperor represents unity, civilization. He embodies that shared identity of the Chinese people.
It's that moment when separate tribes become a civilization, laying the foundation for what we know as China.
Exactly. That connection to a shared past to the Yellow Emperor is what resonates. Even the concept of Huaxia civilization, that term for Chinese culture that emphasizes unity, it all comes back to his reign.
It's incredible how a figure from so long ago, surrounded by myth, can still be so important. It makes you wonder, what stories are we telling today that will last for thousands of years?
That's the big question, isn't it? Maybe the real lesson of the Yellow Emperor isn't about inventions or battles, but about ideas, collaboration, that human desire for progress and unity. And those are timeless.
What a journey this deep dive has been. From lightning strikes to legendary battles, it just goes to show even legends have a lot to teach us. Thanks for joining us.